Hey, it's Tim here. I'm gonna post a quick video here on how I radius wheel wells. Most gassers have them. There's some guys out there that call their cars gassers that don't, but basically they're like a street car with a straight axle. Real race cars, real gassers have radius wheel wells. Back in the day they couldn't narrow housings and axles like they do today. That was something that we did in the the 70s, started happening in the 70s. Late 60s, early 70s, but back in the day, a lot of gassers, they'd go out and buy a rear end out of an Oldsmobile or something like that and just put it underneath there. A good friend of mine has a Olds rear end in his Anglia, and they use Olds Tornado wheels on it to get them spaced under the car as far as they could. Jim Mize's car's that way. Work back in the day, that's how they did it. They take truck rear ends, whatever was big and wouldn't break, that's how they did it. Like I say, guys use 3/4 ton truck rear ends in them, because they didn't have access to aftermarket axles or any way to narrow a housing, so they did what they could. So most of them radiused wheel wells, and I'm going to show you how I do it to try to get a nice round radiused opening and make it fit the tires. So here we go. Jerry Dean's car. You can see I've already cut these, cleaned them up. Typically what I try to do is leave like 1.5 to 2 inches of clearance between the tire and the body. This car here, the tire will space out a little bit more because I've got a Ford axle, which is a 2.5 inch hangout. No brake rotor, nothing like that. So the tire lip will come out even with the body when it's all said and done. So, and then when I'm finishing the body work, I have some rust repair to do on this and stuff like that. I will weld a piece of 1/4 inch round tubing all the way around that opening to stiffen it up some and keep it from cutting the tire, stuff like that. So other things going on. The car, my checklist is pretty much done. As you can see, there's a lot of stuff in there. Pedals, throttle pedals done, clutch stop, throttle pedal stop, both seats are mounted. I got a headrest mounted in there in the window net. Then Sega window nets are optional, but I don't believe for driver safety. You can see my tack mount. You gotta be able to see the tack. These things here, you're not allowed to run a shift light or anything like that. So the tack's gotta be in your face. So you're not looking for it. I think I've said that before. Body's mounted. I did that earlier. Like I say, I'm to the point now where my checklist is done with the exception of mounting the radiator. And I'm going to start mounting fiberglass parts, putting the windows in it, stuff like that. I will weld tabs into the window openings to bolt Lexan in. I did that on a couple previous cars and it worked extremely well, so I'm going to do that on Jerry's as well. I typically, what I'll do is I'll make a fixture to hold that tab down 1/8 of an inch from the edge and weld it in there, and then the windows will be flush with the opening. And typically on these cars I'll paint a silver border on the window so that it looks like trim. Shocks are mounted. I just hope you can see that mount right there. That's how I do the lower shock mount on these. Sega will want these painted a color, but I won't do that. Let the owner do that. I'll have the chassis powder coated and assembled, but steering's all finished in this car. Just the spindles aren't on it right now. I typically use this truck axle, early truck axle in these cars, and the spindle, the only thing different on the spindle is the inner bearing race and the seal. So I just take them and turn them down. I mean, why not? There's nothing wrong with them. So steering, you can see I've got the steering shaft runs through that mount there. And I like using these saddle mounts. It's sort of a more period correct look in my opinion. Distributor's under the cowl, but it'll still come out okay. You can see like down in here where I've mounted my remote starter button. Basically I use a stainless washer with a hole that fits a button, and I weld it on a corresponding size tube, and I flush that out with a firewall. So you can adjust valves and stuff like that. I showed you that on the Hitchhiker. That's where we're at. You know, as you can see, master cylinder mount, pedal mount. I use a Heim on the pedal, left-handed Heim there, and it's a right-handed tube adapter there on the master cylinder, so that you can adjust the height of that pedal. To me, that's pretty important. You know, loosen the jam nuts and you can raise and lower the pedal so you get a good feel for the pedal there. And I'll do the same thing with the clutch. I got to order some 5/16 Heims to do that and get that stuff done. So it's all turning out pretty good. I'm real close to sheet metal work. So, but what I wanted to show you is my contraption here on how I come up with that line to cut. What I've done, I've got an old axle on the inside, and I made some spacers and bolted another axle to it with no bearing on it, so I could get in closer to the body. With the housing located at ride height, which I do with those steel strut rods when I build a car, that is where the car should set at ride height. I square the rear end in the car, you know, double check, because I've taken this all apart and welded it. Some other things I want to show you too on the housing, but we'll wait for a minute on that. I squared the rear end up. I know the rear end is square in the car and it's at the right height, and there's no preload, so one side's not higher than the other. You know, we're square to the world. And then I can put this fixture in there and draw a line to cut this opening. This one here I cut approximately 2 inches down. You know, these cars are built for a 14-inch tire, so a 29.5-inch tire won't fit. And Jerry may end up running like a 28, but you want everything to fit. You don't want to build a car and then have to cut it later on. So we set it up for a 29.5-inch, you know, 10.5 by 29.5-inch tire. So I'm going to set you down here and give you an idea. Oh, I am gonna. What I've done is I built this fixture here. You can see it. Just a piece of tubing that slips over that axle, and I welded a piece of 3/8 tubing to it, and I made this little dealio out of pipe right here, out of 3/8 pipe. I did this a long time ago. I probably was 21, 22 when I built this little dealio for a tram, and I can put my pencil in there and draw this line. I got another one with a scribe down here. You know, like I say, this is like a tram. It fits on a tram that I would use for like sheet metal alignment and stuff like that in a body shop. And you can put it on a longer piece of tube and set your dimensions, and you can check accurately from point to point, you know, just to make sure things are square. Or even if you want to draw a really big circle, this works that way too. So something to think about when you're trying to figure out how to make, you know, stuff to draw circles or check distances and stuff. This works pretty good. Like in this instance here, it's just to draw a line so I can cut. So I'm going to try to set you down here and show you how I use this quick. Sorry about wiggling and jiggling, but that's all I got, guys. I think I get you set up here. There you go. I'm going to try to go in a little bit. There you go. Okay, what I do with this thing is I try to hold it with two hands because of the differing position of the body panel. I can put it up against the body and draw my line, as you can hear, and go in and out with it. Up on the top. It's that simple. Then what I do to try to make it as accurate as possible, I use my offset cutoff wheel, the 3-inch blade. I don't use tin snaps or anything else. I use this little 3-inch cutoff wheel, and then I can just sort of steady my hand and go around this line and cut it real accurately. That way the opening's nice and round. You know, clears the tires good that way. It makes for a nice radius wheel opening. I'm not guessing or I'm not trying to use a pair of scribes on a tire or anything like that. It gives you a goofy looking opening, and you're looking for aesthetically something that's really, really nice. So that's how I do my radius wheel openings with this jig here. I'll show you again. Like I say, it's just an axle with some spacer, 2 axles and some spacers, and a piece of tubing that slips over it fairly good. So talking about housings, okay, and you can't see this because, you know, I sort of got it bolted in the car, but when I built this car, when I started, I just tacked the housing ends on. I don't get carried away, you know, welding them on solid, for the simple reason that when you do all that welding on a rear end housing, I got my shock brackets, my wheelie bar brackets, my ladder bar brackets, the back brace. These things move. They can't help it. They move. So when I'm all done welding and it's completely cool, I'll cut those housing ends loose and re-weld them with my jig so that I know that everything's square to the world. The way this was when I finished it, this car had a 1/4 inch of rear toe in or toe out on the housing, and man, that just makes for a bad driving car. So if you put your ends on, housing ends on last after everything is done welded and cooled, you just get a lot straighter rig. So this one here, I'm going to try to show you. The tube on this one moved about almost 1/8 of an inch. You can see that it's like offset from the housing end. That's super important. So when you buy a housing, it's got the ends welded on, you can expect that stuff to move. Harder on bearings, harder on carrier bearings, axle bearings, all that stuff. So that's something to think about when you're building a car. If you have that opportunity to where you can weld the housing ends on later, I would highly recommend that. That's just the way I've always done it, you know, personally. As you all know, I worked at Moser Engineering, and we'd sell them with the ends welded on, and for the average Joe, that's great. They're not doing this much welding on a housing. So keep that in mind when you're building this stuff, okay? If you can't do it, just buy the housing with the ends tacked on and then have somebody else cut them off and re-weld them later. I highly recommend that. So in the shop, you'll notice there's nothing in here. I got my Chevelle that I move in and out. I got Jerry's car. My junker's back in the back. I've not really touched it other than I'm trying to strip the one door out so I can get all media blasted, but my focus has changed a little bit. I've tried to have 2 or 3 cars in here and get stuff done, and it seems like nothing gets done. So I'm trying to work on one car at a time. Ronnie's got a bunch of stuff that he's doing at home. He's gonna have a little bit of electric surgery here in a couple weeks, and he can't be sweaty or dirty or nothing else, so I'm just going to try to work on one car at a time and tell all my customers out there that watch, if you know this messes you up, I'm sorry, and if you decide you want to do something else, I'm okay with that too. I won't hold it against you, but all I'm trying to do is focus on getting stuff done for the customer one at a time. I don't move them around on the list. I don't do anything else. Every once in a while I'll get an emergency job come in. I've got one for Moser Engineering, an R&D program that we talked about before I retired, and it finally showed up, so I'm trying to help them with that. And I got to bring it in here to do a little bit of sheet metal work, but that'll be a day or two. So like right now I'm trying to thrash and get Jerry's car done so he can at least test it this fall, or you know, have it ready for the first of the year. So but anywho, I think in the back end of Jerry's car, the only thing I got to do is the on-off lever. Everything else is mounted. The battery box is in it, weight tabs, all that stuff. So, like I say, this afternoon I'll be cleaning window openings and prepping them for the metal tabs I got to weld in. And hanging fiberglass doors. When you do these doors, and I'll do a video on them, I'm going to try to use the stock latches. You can see the stock pins in there. I'm not going to buy aftermarket latches, I don't believe. See how that all goes. But I want to put the door handles on so it looks like a 65 Mustang. The windows will be interesting. I've done a bunch of them, so I might try something a little different on Jerry's car. But that's where she's at. You know, like I say, everything's mounted pretty much. And my routes are in for my brake lines. You can see them. This car, we're going to route the battery cable on the outside of the frame. It doesn't need to be inside the frame. So Miss Karen's going to do all the wiring in it. So I'm trying to get like ground tabs in it and everything ready for them. So basically all I got to do is plumb and wire this car, stick their motor in it, and go. So I thought I'd share that information with you, let you see what's going on in the shop. Thanks for watching, everybody.